Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the April edition of the Parker Radio Association Elmer Night. And I am Paul, Papa Alpha Uniform Lima. My call sign is AC5S. And boy, I wish we were together in our face-to-face meeting down at the library, but soon, very soon, I think we'll be back to our normal Elmering night. And I'll tell you what, we have a lot of really cool things planned when we get back together. We have some kit building. We have some antenna building. We have some soldering things that we have scheduled. I mean, we got a lot of really cool stuff. We have some Arduino classes coming up here. All that kind of stuff we really can't do here tonight, but we're really glad you're here. And hopefully we're down to maybe less than 60 days, and we'll have this in person. Maybe next month. Who knows? Maybe the month after. But in any case, welcome to Elmer Night, Parker Radio Association, where we play radio, have fun, and always keep the squelch loose. So we have a great presentation for you tonight. And I will tell you right up front that we've done this presentation before. We have tweaked it a little bit. Because I have a new presenter with me tonight, someone that you all know and love dearly, Dan into SRK. So Dan and I will be doing the presentation tonight. Tom and I did it last time, and I bring in good talent, so it kind of keeps my numbers up, So anyway, we have a presentation on HF operating tonight, and the reason we're doing it again is because we've been asking for suggestions from the membership on what we should do for our Elmer nights, and this has come up from several different members. They've requested this presentation again, so I guess we did it right the first time or first couple times, and so we're going to go through it again. There's a lot of good information in here. I will tell you that as I went through it again today and went through the slides, there's stuff in there that I've done this presentation 2 or 3 times. I learned some stuff today while I was getting prepared to do the presentation tonight. So this is all good stuff. Now, you may be saying, well, I'm just a tech. Well, I know that as a tech, you can still get on HF, and we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight, I think. And also, if you are a tech, you're probably planning to upgrade to a general and then to extra. So all this stuff is important. And if you're an extra and you've been working HF for the last 35, 40 years, you may have forgotten some of this stuff, right? So we're going to go through it tonight, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. Now, if you have some questions about what you're hearing or seeing, if you can hold on to those until after the presentation, just jot them down or something. When the presentation's over, use the Google Meets raise your hand icon, or send it through the chat on YouTube Live, or and we'll filter those through Wayne and get those questions to not only to Dan and I. We'll get them to Tom if necessary. Tom's knows a lot about this stuff. We'll get them to Alan if necessary, whoever, because that's what Elmer Night's all about. We're all Elmers, and so and we've had some questions before that they were tough questions, but somebody had a good answer. So anyway, thank you for joining us tonight. We're really glad you're here. We're going to get started with the presentation. Just a quick second. Dan, do you have any comments before I bring up the presentation?
Hey, thanks, Paul. Appreciate it. Boy, this is it's an exciting time, and I think the timing of this presentation couldn't be better, because we're just about 2 months away from probably the capstone event for the PRA each year, which is Field Day. Field Day is a lot of fun. If you're a new ham, boy, you're really going to learn a lot, not only tonight, but if you're able to join us at Field Day. Just a tremendous opportunity to understand what goes on, not only in some basic radio theory and setup and antennas, but probably three things that are fun with field day. Number one, you get on the air and you're going to make a lot of contacts, and you're going to have people rooting and cheering and coaching you on, which is a blast. The second part of field day, which is a lot of fun, is the learning and the camaraderie and the discussions that take place. We have a lot of fun, we have a lot of laughs, and boy, we learn a lot from one another. And I would be amiss if I did not mention the food. The food is absolutely amazing. Every year it keeps getting better and better. So those are some of the really neat things about field day with the PRA. So again, I think the timing of this presentation couldn't be more perfect than what we're doing right now. And I think Paul said it best. He was putting the presentation together, refining the presentation, and he was learning through it. So, no matter if you're a new ham, a ham for 5 years, maybe you're an extra for 35 or 40 years or more, never stop learning. That's the fun part about amateur radio. Back to you, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So let me go ahead and get this going here. And Wayne, you can tell me if you've got us up on the screen there.
I see your desktop.
Okay.
You have multiple screens?
Just one screen tonight.
All right.
Okay, are we good there?
Yep, looking good.
Okay, well, we're going to start this out tonight. Parker Radio Association Elmer Night for April 2021 on HF operation. We're going to cover a lot of ground here. So, again, take notes if you have any questions. This is presented tonight by N2 SRK and AC5S. Okay, so what are amateur bands anyway? Well, amateur radio bands are a range of dedicated radio frequencies, and that means nobody else can use these frequencies but amateur radio operators, and that's very, very cool. Only available, as it says, to licensed amateur radio operators. There are small differences between countries, so not the entire 40-meter band as we know it is the 40-meter band in Europe. There's some differences, but they're usually small differences. Also, different operational modes are allowed and or suggested on different frequency ranges within each band. So if you're down at 14050, you're not supposed to be operating sideband and that type of thing. Now, usually bands are referred to by wavelength, so i.e. 40 meters. And the way this kind of came about was in the early days of radio, wavelengths were used to designate frequency. So wavelength equals 300 divided by the frequency in megahertz. Over to you, Dan.
So thanks, Paul. Great introduction. So at HF, the high frequency bands, there's the ranges typically go from 3 to 30 megahertz. And the traditional bands within amateur radio are 160 meter, 80 meter, 40 meter, 20 meter, 15 meter, and 10 meter. And those respective frequencies in megahertz are listed there. Now there's also the WARC bands, which is 30 meters, 17 meters, and 12 meters. When you hear about contesting, your contesting typically will always take place in the traditional bands on HF. You usually do not see contesting on the WARC bands. So keep that in mind if you're a contester or if you're getting into contesting. That's pretty important to know, is to make sure that you're avoiding the WARC bands and operating only on the traditional bands. Now, along those lines, there's a great website if you do get into contesting called contesting.com. And the great part behind that website is that it gives you a really good breakdown of the rules, the regulations, the exchanges, things like that. So again, traditional bands there on the left, 160, 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10 meter. And then the WARC bands, 30 meter, 17 meter, and 12 meter. Now, Paul, I got a question for you.
What's that, Dan?
What's the difference between the traditional bands and the WARC bands?
Well, as you said, typically all the contesting is done on the traditional bands. And I don't know, what are the differences, Dan?
That's a really good one, Paul. I know with me being an avid contester, well, somewhat avid contesting, the work bands are kind of the ones I stay away from. So I know from a traditional standpoint, that's where I stand, is mainly on the traditional bands.
So if you're calling CQ contest on 24,900, you're probably not going to get any response during one of the big contests. And the other thing is, just for a note, in case anyone's interested, 160 meters. Well, it's not really high frequency. It's actually middle frequency or medium frequency traditionally. So if people talk about HF, they're typically talking about 80 and up.
Well, the other thing, too, is that the WARC bands is actually an acronym for the World Administrative Radio Conference. And there, again, covers those three particular bands. And it was actually not too long ago that those allocations were created. It was only back, I think, around 1979 or 1980 that those bands were actually allocated for amateur radio use. I think it was allocated in the late 70s and then finally was released and opened in the 1980s. And again, it's very, very small bandwidth that's taking place. And again, the general rule of thumb and the general agreement is that the WARC bands are not used for contesting. So you'll typically see in most of the handbooks that are out that you'll see contest activity shall not take place on 10, 18, and 24 megahertz bands. So, again, no contesting for radio amateurs. They can use the traditional bands.
So let's go to the ionosphere, Dan. The ionosphere derives its name from the term ion, which is a free electron. So the ionosphere is 30 to 400 miles high. And it's the most interesting area of the atmosphere for hams because of propagation. Now, when you're talking about propagation and HF communications, you have to take in consideration the sun activity, whether it be sunspots or other solar events, or the 11-year cycle, and we all know we're at the bottom of the cycle right now, maybe slightly moving up, the season, and also time of day. So these are important things you have to keep in mind and learn before you get really, really good at HF communications. Over to you, Dan.
Well, Paul, you bring up a great point because one of the recent ARRL QST magazines, here comes Solar Cycle 25. And in this month's President's Corner, I really highlighted the importance of what's all the hubbub about this solar cycle and what does that all mean. Paul brought up some really good points as far as the solar cycle is concerned and what takes place, particularly within the ionosphere. So what the ionosphere is going to do is that it's going to refract or bend the radio waves that we transmit. Those waves are bent enough to return to Earth. So when the ionosphere and the atmospheric conditions as well as the sunspots are cooperating correctly, you have some tremendous opportunity for propagation or long-distance communications because those radio waves are bending and returning back to Earth. Others that actually make it through, they're just traveling off into space. So, who knows where your signal could possibly be picked up at that point. A couple of the things that are out there that I think are important for people to understand is not only critical frequency, but then there's also the maximum usable frequency, also known as MUF, M-U-F, as in Mike Uniform Foxtrot. And sometimes people will interchange both of those. So the maximum usable frequency and the critical frequency, let's kind of get into that. And a lot of it depends on the angle of the incidence. So the maximum usable frequency is going to be the maximum frequency which can be reflected for a given distance. And typically, that is going to be 3 to 4 times that of the critical frequency. And I think that's important for people to differentiate. So again, here, the highest frequency where a signal can be reflected back to Earth is that critical frequency. And typically contacts 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 plus miles are absolutely possible with that skip off the ionosphere. And worldwide communications, again, greater than that 2,000, 2,500 miles, are going to use several skips or what's called a multi-hop when conditions are right. The ionosphere is a really, really cool thing to study, to understand, all through this idea of how our radio waves travel. Back to you, Paul.
So as those signals bounce around below the ionosphere, we call radio waves that extend beyond the horizon by refraction. We call that sky. We call those sky waves. Now, there are two factors that determine sky wave propagation. One is the frequency that you're using. Two, the level of the ionization. And the higher the frequency, the less it is bent. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then the highest usable frequency, as Dan already mentioned, to a desired location on Earth is called the maximum usable frequency, or MUF. And that's a very important term. And if you go to certain websites and then you pick different bands that show up on their on different types of soundings and different types of tests that they run with radio frequencies, you can always look at the charts and see what the maximum usable frequency is for whatever frequency, whatever band you're operating on.
I actually think there's a test and measurement site in Boulder here in Colorado that actually has that listed on a lot of the different websites that talk about what the maximum usable frequency is. So that's usually a good spot check for me when I go to check those things out to see what's happening, depending upon the time of day that I'm on. Sometimes early in the morning, that maximum usable frequency may only be as high as 40 meters or 7 megahertz. The graphic that's up on the screen here, we're talking about the propagation via the ionosphere. So again, the signal that's below the maximum usable frequency, you see there in red. So it's being sent from Earth, it's hitting the ionosphere, coming back to Earth, back to the ionosphere, back to Earth, and so on and so on. And I think what's really important behind that, that's part of the multi-hop that we were talking about earlier. Now you also see that HF signal in purple that's making its way through the ionosphere. No refraction taking place or bending coming back to Earth. So those are some of the signals that make it through the ionosphere and then simply just travel on through space. And then the last part, there in green, a VHF signal. Typically, you're not going to see a VHF signal bounce off the ionosphere. Those are going to, if they do make it that far, they're going to travel off into space and not have that return to Earth. So I think it's really important to understand that the ionosphere, although it's there, you have to have the right conditions in order for some of that multi-hop and some long-distance communications to be taking place.
That's correct, Dan. And although that chart showed VHF signals going through the ionosphere out into space, but certainly frequencies above VHF, including UHF and many, many other frequencies higher than that, typically always go through the ionosphere. They're very, very seldom ever refracted. Okay, ionization in the sun. We could bring Wayne in on this, but he didn't prep for it, so we won't do that. But ionization level corresponds closely to sun activity, including sunspots. Sunspots follow an 11-year cycle, and as we've mentioned before, and as you all probably know, we are at the bottom of an 11-year cycle, and maybe slightly on the upswing. And that's why propagation has been so bad here the last couple of years. Now, sunspot ranges, the numbers actually for sunspots range from 0 to 150, and the solar flux numbers range from 60 to 250.
Yeah, one of the things when we're talking about the ionosphere and solar activity is solar flux. And when you're taking a look at measurements or readings as it pertains to the solar flux, the higher the solar flux reading means the higher maximum usable frequency that exists. And those high numbers are really needed if you want to see openings within the 10 meter and 15 meter bands. The lower numbers, you're going to see better operating DX conditions in the 80 and 160 meter. So again, the solar flux plays a pretty significant role into where your signal is going to travel, how it's going to travel. So if you're on different forums or if you're taking a look at different web pages, one of them is qrz.com. They have that splash right up on their main page. And when you see the higher solar flux numbers, that means that maximum usable frequency will be higher, and those high numbers, and what we're going to see in particular with solar cycle 25, we're going to start seeing those higher solar flux numbers. So 10 and 15 meters are going to start springing to life. They're going to become wide open. Going back right when I moved to Colorado was probably right at the peak of the previous 11-year cycle. And I was amazed. I had a very rudimentary antenna, had just got moved into the house, a very basic wire antenna, and making contacts, voice contacts on 10 meters into Spain, all throughout Europe, into Ireland, and even Asia or European Russia on 10 meters. It was absolutely fascinating. And we, as Paul had mentioned, we're coming out of the basement of the previous solar cycle, and this next one is going to be a doozy. It'll be one for the record books, I'm sure, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So if you've just gotten your ticket, or maybe you've just upgraded to general lately, boy, just be patient just a little bit longer, because the next few years we're going to slowly start coming out of that basement. And you give this thing about 5 more years, and we are going to be climbing to the peak. And 10 meters, 15 meters, boy, that's going to be a lot of fun.
So for those hams that are really, really into 10 meters, we want to see a higher solar flux. But for those people that spend a lot of time, energy setting up 160 and 80 meter antennas, and that's their big operating band. Well, it is what it is. We all have to learn to be happy with the solar cycle at the top, middle, and bottom of the cycle. That's just kind of how it is. Okay, the ionosphere has different layers. And these are absolutely critical to understand with regard to how signals refract and how you make long-distance contacts or possibly short-distance contacts as well.
So yeah, jump into that. So the first one that was listed there was the D layer. So the D layer is going to be caused by ultraviolet light, and it forms only during the day. And at nighttime, that D layer will disappear. But what's important is that as it comes out during the day, the D layer is absorbing lower frequency signals. So having long distance contacts on, say, 80 meters or 160 meters during the day is going to be next to impossible. Not to say that it's not possible, but it's going to be nearly impossible to happen. Paul, do you want to talk about the E layer, or you want me to continue?
Yeah, I'll take the E layer, because that's a lot of people live for the E layer, but there for a long time people thought it was caused by wind shear, which it's not. And if you get propagation off the E layer, it can last for just a few minutes to a few hours, and it can actually you can actually get skip via VHF signals with the E layer being ionized as well. And so it can last for a few minutes to a few hours. It's most common May through July, although sometimes over the winter you'll see some phenomenal things happen as well on the higher frequencies. Now, it usually affects 50 megahertz, which is 6 meters and below. But as I mentioned, sometimes it does affect 144 megahertz. And if you've heard other repeaters from coming across your radio from other states, and we don't hear that as much here. But when I lived in Oklahoma and nobody used PL tones back then, back in Oklahoma, Texas, a lot of people don't use PL tones. A lot of times you could hear lots of repeaters when the E layer was active from all over the United States. What about F layer, Dan? That's pretty important.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And Paul, I think there was, I think you and I had one occurrence since we met where we actually had contacts from hams in Texas when we were using Don's repeater that said that they were hearing us. I thought that was pretty cool. So the F layer, so that's going to be responsible for most of your HF propagation. Again, ultraviolet light from the sun is going to be playing a critical part in the F layer. And that's where the F layer really comes from, is that it's that ultraviolet light from the sun. It forms during the day, and unlike what you heard before, it's going to dissipate at night. It won't disappear, but it will simply dissipate. And remember that maximum usable frequency, that's going to vary based upon the level of the ionization. And that's important to really understand. But one of the most fascinating factors behind the F layer is that when the F layer is cooperating, you're going to get some amazing propagation that's going to take place. Now, sometimes the F layer will split. So it's kind of like going to play blackjack and you get two aces. You want to split them. Sometimes the F layer will split into F1 and F2 during the day. So that's pretty neat to see when that happens. It's kind of like getting a bonus.
It's kind of like going to the fair and winning the big teddy bear, right?
Winning two of them.
Well, let's talk about the bands a little bit. I will have to admit this is one of my favorite bands. 160 meters is called the top band, and it's also called the gentleman's band. And so I had a goal many years ago to work all states on 160 meters voice, right? Phone. And it took me like 5 years because there's 2 or 3 states that are just really hard to work from Colorado. But I finally did that. I have the certificate hanging up on my wall here. But it's a fun band, and it's you can operate during the day from local operations. We Justin and I and Dan and I and other people have gotten on after nets and worked on 160 meters, a very, very short distance. But also under the right circumstances, you can work up to a few hundred miles, but that's about it. Now, at night is a completely different story. Long distances are possible. I mean, I've worked Europe on 160 meters, and of course, the state that was the most difficult to get for worked all states was Hawaii. And I have 5 or 6 contacts in my logbook for Hawaii, but that's only going to happen a few nights, maybe a few days, few nights every winter for the band to open up for those types of distances. If you have a better antenna than I did, and maybe you can do a little better than I did, but I only was able to work Hawaii 4 or 5 times. It's often very, very noisy. It's a lot of static, especially in the summer months when there's a lot of thunderstorms around the country. It's almost unusable. So back when I was working on the worked all states 160 meters, probably about the end of May, middle of May, I just didn't ever tune the radio back to 160, and then started in again back in September, maybe October, when the noise settled down a little bit. It's a very challenging band for DX. If you want to work DX, you're probably better off working 160 meters via CW. And that may not be true if you want to work Canada, maybe Alaska, but as you start getting further out, you need to probably use CW mode in order to make European contacts and that type of thing. And antennas can be very difficult to build because of the size. I mean, you need 260 feet for a dipole, And a lot of people running, doing a lot of 160 will have separate transmit and receive antennas in order to work around some of the static and noise that's apparent on this band. And if you're a technician, well, no joy here. There's no operating permitted by technicians on the 160 meter band, the top band, as we call it, or the gentleman's band. But that's another reason why you should upgrade to general and then to extra. Okay, Dan, what about 80 meters?
Well, Paul, 80 meters is covering the 3.5 to 4 megahertz range. And during the day, very similar to what you see on 160 meter, you're going to get that local to several 100-mile contacts are going to be available. 80 meters really comes alive at night, and worldwide communication on 80 meters is not only possible, but it's certainly probable. Now, as we talked about the solar cycle and cycle 25 coming up, or actually starting, 80 meters is going to be a lot of fun at night. Now, just like 160, it's often noisy. And again, we were talking about the summer months, and we all know what takes place during the summer. Particularly here in Colorado, we have a lot of thunderstorms. We have severe weather. Now, think about this. So if we're talking about evening time thunderstorms that are rolling in, and depending upon different parts of the country, static crashes and storms that may be taking place in Kansas, you're going to hear that noise and that static from those storms coming across the 80 meter band. It's also a challenging DX band, as Paul had mentioned, for 160. 80 meters has that same level of challenge that's there. Now, the phone part of 80 meters is sometimes called 75 meters. So keep that in mind. If you hear people talking about 75 meters and 80 meters, they're talking about the phone portion of the 80 meter band when they reference 75 meters. So don't let that throw you off. It's a very, very popular band for nets and rag chewing, not only during the day, but also at night. There are some amazing nets that take place on the net on 80 meters each night. There's several Worked All States nets that are there, and some of them are a lot of fun. And that's really a cool way to find out just what that propagation may be when you listen into those nets, because you'll hear people who do check in on the net. They're looking to make contacts, say they're in Texas and they want to contact into Maine or Vermont or somewhere into New England. Colorado is also a very popular state on 80 meters. People will jump in on it, and they want to know, they want to make those contacts into Colorado. Colorado is a pretty popular Worked All States state, and it's amazing to see how popular that can be if you've ever checked in on one of those nets. So again, great ways, listen in on the nets, find out what areas of the country are coming in, what their signal strengths are. Rag chewing, again, just the casual conversations that are taking place on 80 meters, very similar to what we do on our local repeaters. That rag chewing or just casual conversations will be taking place. Now, unlike 160 meters, 80 meters, you still need a pretty decent antenna to operate. And that dipole is mentioned here, 133 foot long. So again, the antennas can sometimes be difficult in a small space. So if you have a small lot, putting up an 80 meter antenna is going to be somewhat difficult. Now, here's some of the good news. Technicians that are there, you do have privileges on 80 meters. Make sure you're using the CW portion of that band and operating CW only. And if, again, CW not being part of any of the FCC tests, it is just a really cool mode to learn. It's like learning another language. I have a lot of fun doing it, but it's just like my workout routine. I got to stay consistent with it to get really, really, really good at it. So you technicians that may have just passed your test, instead of maybe, hey, I'm not ready to jump into general quite yet, but you want to keep that learning aspect going, try to learn CW and get on the air. It's going to be okay. I'm one who makes lots of mistakes, particularly on CW. You're going to find a lot of patient operators out there. Back to you, Paul.
Well, and I would say, Dan, that 80 meters is my current favorite band, for no doubt at all. I love 80 meters. And you don't have to have full-size antennas to operate 160 or 80 meters. You can put up compromised antennas, and they may not work as well as, if you had a full-size antenna, but you can still get on the air. My antenna is about 85 feet long, and it's an in-fed wire antenna, and I'm on 80 meters 3 or 4 nights a week. I love 80 meters. Now, one other quick thing about 80 meters, if you're new to 80 meters, you're going to hear some goofballs on there. And there's some frequencies that are a little bit, out of the ordinary. So if you hear some stuff going on 80 meters that is a little bit strange, maybe the words they're using and stuff is not appropriate for amateur radio, well, there's just a little bit of that sometimes on 80 meters, and you just have to kind of tune someplace else. Okay, 40 meters. Man, 40 meters, what a band, I mean, I've always said that 40 meters is open somewhere all the time, 24 hours a day, and it is. You can tune on 40 meters during the day, during the night. It doesn't matter. You're going to hear conversations. Now, during the day, it's usually local, out to about 1,000 miles, maybe a little more from time to time. But at night, it's absolutely worldwide as possible. And I think it's probably the most reliable band. I mean, if you just wanted to put up one antenna and most of your operating was in the evening, but maybe a little bit during the day, I'd go with a 40-meter dipole, a single band 40-meter dipole. But like I said, it's always open somewhere. And I think most people do consider it a nighttime band. But I've made several really, really good voice contacts during the day on 40, and some digital contacts as well. Now, the antennas are much more manageable. If you use a compromised antenna, you certainly don't even need 66 feet. But antennas are manageable. You can use verticals, you can use wires, whatever the case is. And because of the low takeoff angle of the vertical antennas, they work very, very well for 40 meters. Excellent, as a matter of fact. Now, K5GS, my neighbor when I lived in Divide, said he was going to put up a 40-meter beam on his tower, and I was like, okay, I'll help you do that. I didn't realize how big that antenna was. If you've ever seen somebody with a 40-meter Yagi on a tower, if you've never seen that, or you get an opportunity to see that, go check that out. It's a big antenna, and it just the tri-banders that people put up. The 10, 20, 10, 15, and 20 tri-banders are so small compared to the large beams for 40, but they're kind of interesting and they work very well. So if you do have a tower that will support it, and you have a heavy-duty rotor and you've calculated wind loading and all that, we'll go for it. Definitely go for it. And then the other thing is, as in the 80-meter band, there is a section of the band that technicians can operate CW on. So 40 meters, 2 thumbs up on my end. Dan, over to you.
Okay, Paul, thanks. So now getting into 30 meters, which is the 10.10 megahertz through 10.15 megahertz, really narrow area. Just like 40 meters, you're going to get that 1,000 miles or more contacts during the day. Nighttime, again, worldwide communication and contacts are absolutely possible. Very, very similar to the 40-meter band as far as how it behaves, particularly during the day and night, and then also on DX. So if you're seeing a lot of DX on 40 meters, you're probably going to see a lot of DX on 30 meters as well. Now, as we start going up in megahertz, so here we are, we're in the 10 megahertz section. Antennas start to become a little bit more manageable. Now your dipole ideally is going to be right around 46 feet long. But as Paul had mentioned, those compromised antennas, some of the shorter ones, are absolutely, as long as you can tune them, you can have some activity on 30 meters as well. And don't discount vertical antennas. Paul had mentioned that on the 40-meter side. Vertical antennas can be very, very effective for DX, but what's absolutely critical is you have those radials on the ground. There are vertical antenna manufacturers that are out there that say, oh, you don't need radials with this vertical antenna. Put radials down. Radials are going to be your friend. Now, we were talking about the WARC bands. 30 meters is a WARC band. So who remembers what you can't do on a WARC band? That's right. You can't contest on a WARC band. CW and data only. And then you're also limited as far as your output is concerned. You're going to be limited to 250 watts. There's going to be no phone contacts, or what I mean by that is no voice contacts. And unfortunately, technicians, you don't have privileges on 30 meters. So another good reason to upgrade. So again, 30 meters can be a lot of fun, particularly on CW or any of the other data modes. Just remember, no contesting and no voice contacts on 30 meters. Back to you, Paul.
Well, Dan, we're starting to see a pattern here, right? For those of you that have been operating HF, you probably have figured out that even at the bottom of the sunspot cycle, you can operate 40 and 30 and 20. And if we took a fictitious member, let's just call her Sheila, for instance, and she had a station set up during the day, well, she could go all three bands. She could go work on 40, she could work on 30, and she could work on 20. And that is what's so cool about those three bands. Absolutely, positively, for the day, you can operate on all three of those bands. Now, 20 meters is probably a lot of hams will say it's their favorite band. And the reason it is because during the low point in the sunspot cycle, like we're in now, you can still make contacts, and we get propagation that's fairly decent on this band every day. And it goes out to about 500 miles during the day, and it also can be worldwide. And at night, when we have good solar conditions, you can actually operate 20 meters 24 hours a day, especially at the top of the sunspot cycle. I've seen 20 meters literally be open 24 hours a day. At 2 a.m. in the morning, I'm making contacts with Germany. It's amazing. So a lot of people do consider this the best DX band. And because antennas are absolutely manageable, size-wise, both from beams, from Yagis to verticals to dipoles, you can get on the air on 20 meters regardless of what type of antenna that you have or what type of size of lot you have, or whether you just have a balcony, you can almost always get on the air on 20 meters. So someone told me that this last line where no technicians are allowed to operate on 20 meters was incorrect. I did not check it, but I think it is correct. I don't think there's any technician capability on 20 meters. So keep that in mind, what we said. We have 40 meters, 30 meters, and 20 meters can always be used in some way, shape, or form during the day, and 20 meters possibly a lot further into the night as the sunspot numbers come up.
Hey, thanks, Paul. So another really, really cool band. It seems like I'm getting the WARC bands. I've had a lot of fun on 17 meters, particularly on CW as well as some digital. So 17 meters, hundreds of miles to worldwide during the day. So as we start going up in megahertz now at 18 megahertz, you're going to start seeing that propagation during the day will absolutely start increasing, not only to that hundreds and thousands of miles, but to worldwide. During the night, it can be open worldwide, particularly when you have those high sunspot levels. So make sure you're checking those. If you're seeing some activity worldwide on 30 meters and 20 meters, more than likely you're going to start seeing some of that activity also starting to trickle over into 17 meters as well. As far as antennas are concerned, look at how much we've shortened that length overall. So a dipole at 25 foot long, absolutely manageable, even in some of the smaller watts in some of the communities that we have. 25 foot long dipole, absolutely going to do the trick. Vertical antennas can absolutely be a very, very good option on 17. There's a lot of different manufacturers that are out there on vertical antennas that will do multi-band as long as you have a good tuner with it. And that also holds true on 17 meters. Those vertical antennas can be a very, very good option. And beams are becoming a little bit more manageable. Unlike what you saw, what Paul had mentioned for 40 meters, a 17 meter beam absolutely becomes a little bit more manageable if you go that route, if you're lucky enough to have maybe the square footage or the yard to be able to put up a tower. Some of our members here who have some new homes in the area, they're putting up some towers, and that's really, really exciting. It's going to be some cool things to see here in the coming months as the weather starts getting a little bit warmer, and maybe Old Man Winter will decide to get out of here, although he's making his presence known in Colorado this evening. And again, 17 meters, a warp band, so remember, no contesting here permitted. And technicians, unfortunately, you don't have privileges on 17 meters. So again, great reason to be a general or above, but at the same time too, 17 meters, even though it's just a little sliver of bandwidth, you can have a lot of fun with propagation and worldwide contacts on 17 meters. Back over to you, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And a couple other quick comments on 17 meters real quick. You'll notice we talked about on 30 meters, there is no voice, no phone that's allowed on 30 meters, but that's not the case on 17 meters. Even though it is a WARC band, phone or voice is allowed on 17 meters. And the other thing is that what we're seeing as the sunspot cycle starts moving its way up back to better conditions, we've been seeing 17 meters opening up, and in some cases opening up for 2 or 3 days at a time and getting into Europe and Asia. And a lot of people running FT8 have been running only 17 meters here for the last several months because it's been a fantastic band during the day. So keep that in mind. Okay, let's go to
before you jump into 15 meters.
Go ahead.
Well, one of the things I do want to mention, I know we've been talking a lot about dipoles and vertical antennas. Also keep in mind that mag loops work very, very well on 40 meters through 10 meters. And I'd like to thank Brad, W0BDT, for that little nugget of information. Great call there, Brad. So don't forget about the mag loops. They're a really, really great antenna to use, 40 meters through 10. So back to net.
And Dan, we could do a whole Elmer night just talking about Brad and how he was kind of forced to use a magnetic loop due to some concerns he had at his house, and he's made lots and lots of contacts on a mag loop. He's very good with the mag loop, and he brings it out to some of our Elmer nights or Elmer events, and it's really fun to see him use that. So definitely keep the magnetic loop in mind for a lot of these bands. Well, let's talk about 15 meters for a minute. Well, this is my I'm going to say during the upswing and the peak of the sunspot cycle, this is my favorite band. I love 15 meters. It's a fantastic band. It actually opened up earlier this winter and was open for almost 2 weeks. And we were making contacts all over the world on 10 watts digital FT8. But we were also making some really, really good worldwide voice contacts as well. Now, you're not going to find 15 meters open every day during this time of the sunspot cycle, but when it does open, fun band to play with. During the day, hundreds of miles to worldwide contacts easily. At night, it will stay open very late with high sunspot levels and sometimes 24 hours a day. It's a great DX band as we're on the upswing and during the peak of the sunspot cycle, and on the downswing on the backside. It's still absolutely a great band till we get to the bottom of the cycle. And if you work any of the D-expeditions anywhere in the world, people that go set up stations on remote islands or remote operating positions all over the world, they call them D-expeditions, and they're usually on the air for a short period of time, and everybody tries to work these stations. One thing you can be assured of, every single D-expedition anywhere in the world, they're always on 15 meters. Even at the bottom of the sunspot cycle, they'll still be trying to make contacts on 15. So if you're having trouble working Ducie Island or one of the famous D-expeditions on 20 because of the pileups, or 40 maybe on on 10 huge pileups, try the D-expedition on 15 meters. They're there. I guarantee you they're there. And if the propagation's good, you will work them. Antennas, very manageable. Very, very manageable. And verticals are excellent because of low takeoff angle. The dipoles are short. And again, loop antennas work well on this band as well. Beams are common because a lot of your beams that people put up are called tri-banders, and they're 10, 15, and 20. Very common antennas that you see on towers. And during the high point of the sunspot cycle, they're probably the best antennas to have on your tower. Absolutely, positively. Now, if you're a technician, there is a CW portion. There's a portion of the band that you can operate CW on, and I would encourage you to do that while you're studying for your general and your extra. Dan, how about 12 meters? Have you ever made any contacts on 12 meters?
Paul, I have made some contacts on 12 meters, believe it or not, but I've never done it during a contest. You know why? Because it's a work band, and I'm not going to contest on work bands.
Oh, really?
No, you can't do that. So getting back to 12 meters, so we're talking about the 24 megahertz, so in specifically 24.89 through just shy of 25 megahertz. Again, during the day, hundreds of miles to worldwide contacts are absolutely possible. Now, during those high sunspot years, again, here we go. We're coming out of the basement on solar cycle 24, getting into solar cycle 25. Probably in the next 4 to 5 years, 12 meters will be open at night. We're going to have some of those high sunspot years taking place with the new solar cycle. So be patient. 12 meters is going to explode with a lot of activity. It's a great DX band during those high sunspot years. Again, with solar cycle 25 coming, it's really exciting. This is, if you've been licensed for 10 years or more, you're probably been waiting to go, boy, when is DX going to get good again? It's coming right around the corner. We're not that far away. So 12 meters can be a lot of fun for DX, again, when those sunspots are cooperating. And as you've probably seen, now the dipoles are starting to get a little bit longer, or excuse me, a little bit shorter in size. So a good dipole on 12 meters is only going to be 18 foot long. Beams can be helpful. And again, unfortunately, technicians, no operation permitted here. Don't have privileges, but if you're a technician and you have an HF radio, listen into 12 meters. You're going to be amazed at what you hear, both day and night. Test it out. I'm a very, very big advocate on, even if you don't have privileges on a certain band, get on there and listen in. Find out what's going on. Find out what propagation is like during the day. Check those sunspots. What's happening there? If those sunspots are low, guess what? You're going to want to probably be on a little bit during the day. If those sunspots are really high, get on at night, find out where the propagation is. 12 meters can be a very, very fun band. Back to you, Paul.
Well, now we're at 10 meters, and I will tell you that my first 10-meter radio was made by Radio Shack, and when there's no propagation at all on 10 meters, like there hasn't been for the last 4 or 5 years to speak of, 2 or 3 years anyway, you can still find those Radio Shack 10-meter mobile radios for $40 sometimes, $40 or $50, and then as the sun does its thing and we start moving to the peak of the cycle, those same radios sell for a few $100s. So get them while the getting's good. But 10 meters again is certainly one of the better bands during the high sunspot years. And you can operate, as Dan mentioned earlier, you can operate worldwide, certainly hundreds of miles, and with very, very clear communications. It's almost like you're on a repeater, and there are quite a few 10-meter repeaters that are on the air during high sunspot cycles as well, that maybe are not on the air at this particular time. But at night, you can actually work worldwide late into the evening during high sunspot years at the peak of the sunspot cycle. And but during the day, it can be just absolutely fantastic with a very modest antenna, I might add. And that, when you look at antennas, you can operate 10 meters on a mobile antenna that's attached to the railing in the apartment you live in. You can throw up a very, very small short piece of wire is all it takes, and you can operate that way. And of course, they do make 10-meter verticals and a lot of 10-meter mobile antennas. So we've been talking a lot about different types of antennas that are, best for these different bands. We haven't talked much about mobile operations, but and we're not going to get into that too much tonight. But I will tell you that there's a lot of mobile 10-meter activity because the antennas are so short, and you definitely positively want to try that out when we get down the road a couple years from now. Also, it's a huge frequency range, very wide, one of the best ranges of frequencies that we have in all of the amateur bands. So you can spread out and you can get up and down the band. You can work digital, you can work CW, you can work voice, AM, whatever you want to do. 10 meters is a fantastic band when we get closer to the peak of the sunspot cycle. And you'll hear everything on there. Every different type of mode you can imagine, you will hear on 10 meters. Over to you, Dan.
Hey, thanks, Paul. So before we get into HF operating activities, there was one band in particular, and I'd like to thank Scott for calling this out, that we did miss, which is the 60-meter band. So back in 2011, the FCC issued a report and order that expanded our privileges in amateur radio on the 60-meter band. Those actually took place probably the early part of 2012. Now, what really makes 60 meters different than what you've seen on any of the other bands, amateurs in the United States are permitted to operate on 5 frequency channels, and each of them can have an effective bandwidth of only 2.8 kilohertz. So there's 5 channels within the 60-meter band or the 5 megahertz band that can be used. And operators who are generals, advanced, or extras have privileges there, but it's also really important to note that the frequencies that appear on your radio tuning display when your transceiver's in USB mode, because you're using the frequencies shown are actually going to be suppressed carrier frequencies. So power is going to be 100 watts or less. Relative to a half-wave dipole. So keep that in mind. 60 meters can also be a lot of fun as well. You're going to use upper sideband, you can do CW, and you can use digital as well. Now the CW operation can take place in what they're calling channel center frequencies. which we could have a very, very long discussion on everything that's involved within 60-meter operation. And if you're looking for more information on that, you can check the ARRL website. They have a great splash page on the basics and as well as details on 60 meters, or just do a Google search on 60-meter operation. You're going to find a mess of information that's out there. Now, one of the things that's important within 60 meters, again, is just make sure your transmissions are as short as possible, frequent breaks, and listen for other signals. It's a split channel operation that is permitted, but it's somewhat not too, let's just say split operation would be frowned upon on 60 meters because you're using a channel basis on that. So again, we would be at fault if we did not mention 60-meter operation.
And Dan, can I make 2 more comments about 60 meters real quick?
Yes, sir.
So once or twice a year, amateurs are allowed to talk to the military directly, and also other government agencies, not just the military, but once or twice a year, amateurs are allowed legally to talk to the military and other government agencies on 60 meters. And it's a test that they do to make sure there's interoperability between the amateur community and the military and other government agencies like FEMA. So when you see that test advertised, get on there. It's a lot of fun. You can actually communicate with Air Force stations and FEMA stations and all different types of stations, and that's all on HF. The other thing about 60 meters is that, as Dan mentioned, it is a shared frequency, and I think there's some power limitations as well. But we had a guest speaker at one of our club meetings who was instrumental in actually setting up 60 meters, and he's really big into interoperability and wanting amateurs to be able to communicate in times of emergency on these frequencies and vice versa. So anyway, check out 60 meters. And if you're just wanting to play around a little bit with, you run an FT8 during the day, I will tell you there is a fair amount of FT8 activity on 60 meters. But again, it is channelized. And the reason it's channelized, well, is because all military and government HF operating is channelized. So that's just a little tidbit there. Okay, Dan, over to you for HF operating activities.
All right, Paul. Yeah, great capstone on 60 meters. Just a fun band, and I certainly want to thank Scott K0WAV for raising his hand and saying, "Hey guys, don't forget about 60 meters." So I want to thank you for that, Scott. So on HF operating activities, you want to talk about a buffet of opportunities that are out there. I enjoy a good contest. I don't know about you. I enjoy a good contest. I like the speed of which it goes. I like the exchanges. It's amazing to see a lot of different countries just come out during contests. That can be a lot of fun to really rack up your DX contacts totals. But I also have a lot of fun rag chewing and just having casual conversations, not only locally, maybe after nets. But what's really neat is that when there's a group of us that will get on HF, say after a local net, it's amazing to see other operators from other parts of the country say, "Hey, I'm from Texas," or "Hey, I'm from Mississippi, I'm from Florida," and they join in the conversation. So that's a lot of fun as well. Awards, boy, there's a mess of awards that are out there. DXCC. So what DXCC is, probably one of the more premier awards that you can get. That is confirmations of contacting 100 different countries. Very, very great award to get. WAS, Worked All States, another great award. And there's numerous awards within the Worked All States and DXCC. You can do it by band. You can do it by mode. There's just a mess of awards that are out there. The WAC, Worked All County Awards. Boy, there's there's a tremendous following and pursuit with people who are trying to work all counties. That is something really cool. So if you've worked all states and you haven't worked all counties, boy, that's another great one to jump into as well. Special event stations. One of the ones I really like on special event stations are when a lot of the battleships activate their amateur radio stations. I had the opportunity not too long ago to actually operate from the Queen Mary out in California. That was so much fun to be able to operate from there. It's great to contact them, and boy, it's great. They send QSL cards regularly, which is great. But actually working at the Queen Mary station and being able to operate that station, once people know that the Queen Mary's on the air, the contacts just start pouring in, and that becomes a lot of fun as well. And special event stations just don't have to be battle, things like that. Celebrations of an anniversary within an amateur radio club. You can have military recognition. You could have even city and county recognition. So make sure you check those out. Those special event stations can be a lot of fun to contact. QRP. So QRP is actually going to be operating at a transmit level of 5 watts or less. That can be very, very challenging considering the current solar cycle conditions and where we're at. But once we start coming to the peak and throughout that process, really over the next, what will be nice, probably 8 years, you QRP enthusiasts that love a good challenge, QRP operation is going to be a lot of fun, and it's actually going to become a little bit easier because your 5-watt signal is going to be traveling a lot further. Remember those ionospheres and the different layers. Those are all going to be coming into play where a 5-watt signal in the next 4 to 5 years is going to act very similar to a 50 or 100-watt signal as far as the distance it's going to travel. But even in not so ideal conditions and you like a good challenge, QRP can be a lot of fun as well. Even at the bottom of the solar cycle, many of us have made QRP contacts, and it's amazing when people when you tell them that you're only operating with 5 watts, people are amazed and they go, wow, your signal sounds great. That's kind of the cool part and some of the magic behind QRP operating. There's lots of nets. There's nets that go on not only daily, but probably hourly throughout the HF spectrums. Some of them are very informal. Some of them are very formal. There's lots of nets. If you're trying to work some awards, the Worked All States, there's a lot of Worked All States nets on HF. That can be a lot of fun to really rack up those state totals. Maybe you have an elusive state like North Dakota, maybe Wyoming, maybe Nebraska. You jump on some of those nets, those Worked All States nets during the week, you'll probably end up working them very, very quickly. So good stuff there. Make sure you listen in because each net has its own format. So make sure you listen in before you jump in. That way you understand the cadence, you understand the rhythm, you understand what net control's looking for as far as the exchange and when they pass it over to you to make a contact. So make sure you're using both ears before you use the mouth. That's why we were given 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Lots of different modes. That's the really fascinating part within HF. There are just a plethora of different modes that are out there, from sideband to RTTY, CW, some of the digital modes like PSK31, FT8, even JT65, Olivia, Slow Scan TV, many more that are out there that can be utilized, and it's just cool to see how many operators are on all those different modes. And what's really neat through the evolution of amateur radio, there's more digital modes that are coming out, which is really, really cool. So I noticed in the latest upgrade that I did of WSJTX software, there's a new mode that I've never seen before. So I'm looking forward to finding out what that's going to be all about. The learning never stops. It always continues. The digital modes have become very popular on HF. For me, when I operate some of the digital modes, such as FT8, I call it a multitasking mode. I want to be on the air, but I'm also checking emails, following up on certain things. I could even be on the telephone, and it just kind of runs in the background, and you keep an eye on it. Great way to make some contacts. You want to get those state totals up, maybe those county totals up. Digital modes can be a lot of fun. But if you're beyond, hey, I want to do more than just I want to do digital, but boy, just clicking the mouse isn't for me. Do the keyboard to keyboard contacts like PSK31. PSK31 is a great keyboard to keyboard contact. It's amazing how your typing speed will increase the more and more you use a keyboard to keyboard mode like PSK31. Very similar to CW. The more that you use that gray matter in between, and the more routines that you get into it, the easier it will become. I know there was a hand up. I think that belonged to Tom. GQ. Well, Tom, if you're there, I'll throw it over to you for a quick comment.
No comment. That was a mistake.
Okay, that was. We'll call that a virtual kerchunk. How's that? So again, HF operating, lots of things to do. It's beyond voice. It's beyond CW. Digital modes, awards, DX. You could even say, hey, I want to see what my radio will do. Instead of going at 100 watts, let me bring it down to 50. Let me bring it down to 10. Let me try QRP. You can do QRP from home. QRP is not just limited to going out into the field or going camping. You can do QRP from home. So just a mess of absolute fun stuff you can do on HF. Back to you, Paul.
Well, Dan, and there's also one thing that is not on this slide, and you talked about listening, and I'll just throw this out because I don't think it's on the next slide either. Propagation Beacons. Now, these are transmitters that are on a variety of the different amateur bands, and they transmit beacons. You know, they transmit a signal, and sometimes they have varying power levels, sometimes various transmission formats. But if you want to find out whether or not a band is active, you can go to a beacon frequency and listen. And there's beacons on 10 meters and 15 meters and not as much, maybe 20 and 40, but there are beacons on 60 meters. So just keep that in mind. Something else you can do as well. Let's go to the next slide. There's a few other things here. We did mention that 60 meters is channelized, but basically none of the other HF operating that you do on any of the other bands is channelized. So it's, you just pick a frequency and listen first and then transmit, or just listen if that's what you want to do. Watch your band edges. You know, very, very important. Learn what the width of a single sideband transmission is, and make sure that you're not so close to the edge of the band that you're actually transmitting into an area that we're not allowed to transmit on. Also remember, nobody owns a frequency except that crazy nut up in Canada says he owns a frequency, I think, but no one really owns a frequency. And so, you know, always ask if the frequency is in use before you transmit. That's very, very important. It's kind of funny because sometimes we'll go to an HF band after one of our VHF or UHF nets, and you hear everybody going on that, getting on that frequency, and we all say, is the frequency in use? Is the frequency in use? And, you know, so always ask if the frequency is in use before transmitting. And, you know, just avoid interfering with other stations. That's not always possible to find an area of the band during a contest where you can, you know, potentially get on and operate with 100% certainty that you're not going to interfere with someone, but do the best you can to find a clear frequency and just go to another band. If you can't find anything on one band, there's just a lot of people on, especially maybe in the digital section, CW section, you can always try another band. Use and learn standard phonics for call signs. This is usually important. It helps people on the other end, but you won't hear that necessarily during contest. You will hear other words that are used, and that's okay because it's just kind of a contest thing, like AE2 America, right? So that's just part of the way people talk during contest, and always use your full call sign, right? If you're transmitting, if you're into SRK and you're operating in a contest, it might be tempting to say November 2 Sierra, right? November 2 Sierra. Well, it's shorter. Maybe it'll grab their attention because it's a short call sign, even though that's not a legal call sign. But you shouldn't do that. You should always give your entire call sign into SRK, and you'll hear some people try that technique during contest, and it really kind of sounds silly. So always use full call signs for IDs. And I'll just cover this real quick because there's not very much on this page. And I'll throw it back to you, Dan. But if you're going to operate on voice or phone, and that is the most popular mode, by the way, on HF. There's a lot of people on FT8, and maybe in any given slice of time, it's not the most popular. Voice is not the most popular mode, but it really is overall. And just keep in mind that when you're operating single sideband on voice, that if you are on 160 meters, 80 meters, or 40 meters, you should always be on lower sideband. And if you're on 10, 12, 15, 17, or 20 meters, you should be on upper sideband. And if you're on 60 meters, because it's channelized and it kind of follows the form and tradition of military communications, that is also upper sideband as well. Over to you, Dan.
Hey, thanks, Paul. One of the things I think is also very important that you had mentioned, you're going to have what I would call probably very unprofessional operators on HF. You're going to come across them. And what I always remind people, we have a really big knob on most of our radios. Don't be afraid to use this and tune away from them. That's the best way to keep yourself out of trouble and just avoid the tornado. So you hear something you don't like on HF, spin the knob, go somewhere else. It's a great way to keep the hobby a fun hobby for you and not get sucked into anything. So as far as HF Qsos are concerned, you can start your HF Qsos maybe by answering somebody who's calling CQ. And typically what you're going to do is you're going to answer a CQ with the calling station's call sign followed by yours. So if Paul was calling me, actually, you know what? I'll use the example that's on here. So if Scott was answering Justin's call, so Scott's call sign is AK6Q and Justin was calling AE2L. So if Justin was calling CQ, he would be saying something along the lines of CQ 20 meters. This is Alpha Echo 2 Lima, Alpha Echo 2 Lima calling CQ and standing by. And if Scott wanted to answer, Scott would say AE2L, this is Alpha Kilo 6 Quebec in Denver, how copy? And that is the initiation of how you answer a CQ going on. So good stuff there. So you don't necessarily have to start by answering a CQ, but sometimes that just kind of gets some of those maybe a little bit of mic fright out of your system by answering somebody who's calling CQ. But you can also call CQ. It's a great way to find out, number one, how your signal's getting out based upon who's answering you. But what's really important is that when you call CQ, you want to keep it short. And sometimes you want to develop your own style. There's really no wrong way to do it. But calling CQ, you want to make sure it's short because people will want to contact you. They'll want to talk to you. And if you're transmitting, you're not able to hear them. So make sure you're keeping your CQ styles relatively short. And as mentioned here, there's really no wrong way to do it. So we'll use Justin as an example here. His call sign is AE2L. He would say something along the lines of this. This is Alpha Echo 2 Lima calling CQ, 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 CQ 20 meters. Alpha Echo 2 Lima calling CQ 20 meters and standing by. Or he would say something along the lines of CQ, CQ from Alpha Echo 2 Lima, standing by. And just repeat that. Eventually, people are going to be what I call fishing the band. They're going to be scanning the band, listening for people calling CQ. So if you keep your CQ cadences short, but you repeat them with an appropriate amount of spacing, and usually you want to give 5, 6, or 7 seconds of space between when you say standing by and then starting your CQ cadence all over again. You want to make sure that you keep that space for those that are trying to contact you. So again, I think it's really neat to develop your own style. For those that are coming out to field day, you're going to see several different styles of people calling CQ. And that's awesome. We want different styles because the operator has to be comfortable with, their own cadence of what they're doing. As long as they're keeping it legal, they're announcing their call sign, they're calling CQ, absolutely legal to do. But again, couple suggestions. Just keep it short as far as the overall cadence is concerned. Make sure you have an appropriate pause from when you say you're standing by and starting your next round of CQ calling.
Well, and Dan, I think people always give me a kind of a hard time, or they kind of laugh a little bit because I'm always saying, hello 20, hello 20, hello 20 meters. Or hello 40, hello 40, hello 40 meters. This is Alpha Charlie 5 Sierra. Hello 40, hello 40 meters. So that's how I do it. Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about Qsos with DX stations. There's a few things that you need to know when you're operating with a DX entity. I would say listen and follow the lead of other stations who have worked DX for a longer period of time than maybe you have, and use the best practice. Listen before you transmit. If it's a station that's operating split, make sure you understand what's going on before you transmit on the wrong frequency. If the DX station doesn't want to rag chew, well, don't attempt to rag chew with that station. If the DX station wants to rag chew and you don't want to rag chew, well, don't make the contact. Okay. A lot of DX stations have, like all of us, the operators have jobs and families and this and that. So if they're just giving out signal reports, whether it be, in a contest, which is almost always signal reports, but anytime, if they're not wanting to rag chew, don't rag chew. If they're just giving out signal reports, just give them a single signal report yourself and move on down the road to another frequency. Let some other people make a contact. If you are working anybody during a contest, whether it's DX or not, you always give 5.9. So we could have a whole net on, why that's the case, but just keep in mind during all contests, you always give a signal report as 5.9. Okay. And occasionally you'll hear somebody on there, say you are 2.2 or you are, 4.4 or whatever, but that's, you don't do that during a contest. And if you want to do it during a regular DX QSO, in a non-contest format, then that's fine. They probably will still give you a 5.9, but who knows? That's just how it works. Listen and follow the DX station's instructions for calling. If you're working a DXpedition, a lot of times they'll work split. And what this does is, with hundreds of people calling them, split allows them to manage the pileups. Okay, it's not for you, it's for them. So listen If they say we're operating split and we're up 20 or we're up 10, you'll figure out what that means over a period of time, but follow those instructions. The last thing you want to do is transmit on a frequency that they're listening on, because then they can't hear anybody. So just follow the other station's instructions if they're operating split, and you may have to sit there and listen for 30 minutes before you really get the hang of it, but that's not a big thing, because a lot of times the de-expedition's on the air for several days in a row continuously. And most importantly, I think if you're in a pileup, or there is a pileup and you're wanting to contact the DX station, just give your call sign once. Okay? Don't get on there and say AC5S, 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 AC5. That's not how you operate a DX station, either during a contest or otherwise. Because I guarantee you, if it's a rare entity, if it's a rare DX country, that station is not going to come back to you. They're just not going to do it. If you're not following the rules and playing the game, very often they just ignore you. And I heard a guy on there doing all the things that you could possibly do wrong. He was doing all of them, and he didn't figure it out for quite a while. But this station I believe the station was in Brazil, if I remember right. But the Brazilian station was not going to go back to this guy just because he was not following the protocol for making these contacts. So listen first, follow other stations' leads, and if you have any questions, get a hold of somebody in the club that does a lot of this, and we can guide you. We can give you some advice, especially when it comes to contests, because there's some things that go on during contests that seem, they operate very fast. It's a very dynamic environment, and the first time you do it, you may not do it exactly right, but you'll get the hang of it after you make a few contacts. Over to you, Dan.
Hey, thanks, Paul. So again, throughout all this, we've talked a lot about the different layers. We've talked about the ionosphere. And again, part of this is all about learning about propagation. And I think what's important is that there can be several online sites that you check out and you see band is closed, no activity, low solar numbers, things like that. Don't necessarily believe everything that you're reading or you're hearing, even on the local repeaters of, oh boy, HF is dead or the bands are dead. Get on different bands at different times of the day. The bottom line is you want to get on the air. And a band is usually open somewhere when propagation is not good for DX. So work those other states. So if you haven't worked several states on the East Coast, check that out. You're going to want to do that. The important part is that get on the air, even if the online forums are saying the bands are closed, the bands are dead. Get on the air. You are going to be surprised. I've seen it particularly on 40 and 80 meters when I've seen online forums to say, you know what, the bands are dead or the band is closed, bad propagation, and I got on the air. I was amazed, and this happened fairly recently. I was able to talk to a South African station, actually on 40 meters. Many of us have contacted good old Wild Bill in South Africa. Bill came alive on 40 meters. It was as if he was in the next town over. He was very loud, came through crystal clear. I got him on the first call, which I had almost fell out of my chair when I got him on the first call, and actually got a 5.9 report out of him, which was really good. And boy, he was coming in at about 10 over. So again, get on the air. That's going to be the key behind all of this, obviously. There are DX clusters that are out there, and DX clusters can actually be a very useful tool for you. So DX clusters are typically online forums where people are posting, here are the DX entities, or here's who I just talked to, and here's how far away they are from me. So if you start seeing, since we're in the zero call area or in Colorado, and you see a lot of zero call signs on the DX clusters that are talking to Asiatic Russia, or maybe into Europe, or parts into Africa or the Middle East, that's also a really good indication of, you know what, there's some activity going on those HF bands. So get on there. Make sure you check out some of those DX clusters. They can be a very, very useful tool for you. Paul had mentioned beacons before. I will listen in on 10-meter beacons to see if 10 meters is alive. Those 10-meter beacons are going to be sitting down in the CW portion of the band on 10 meters. And if I start hearing those beacons with their CW IDs coming out, I'm trying to figure out, okay, what state are they in? I hear their state and I go, aha, that beacon is in New Jersey, or aha, that beacon is in Washington State. That's giving me an indication of what that propagation is doing on that band. And during your operating activities, you're going to start learning about propagation. And for me, the best way to find out about how the bands were cooperating and what propagation was doing was listening in on nets. That is probably one of the quickest, easiest ways that you can find out what's happening with propagation on those particular bands. There's numerous nets, I would think, almost hourly throughout any of the HF bands. You're going to find them. There's some great worked all states nets that are on 80 meters and 40 meters in the evening. They're a lot of fun to listen to. Again, as mentioned here, on 20 and 40 meters. DXCC, working those 100 countries. Sometimes you'll, they're the actual same South African station actually has a short net that he runs as well for people on 40 meters that want to make contact with South Africa. There's a station in Texas that helps coordinate that as well, so that can be a lot of fun. And then bottom line, contests. So check out that contesting.com. Take a look at the contests that are going on this week. Use those contests as a guide based upon where those contests are being operated on and what HF portions of the band. You can have a lot of fun on contests. The cool part behind contests is that a lot of the DX entities will come out during contests, and that can be a lot of fun for sure. So again, learn about that propagation, and the best way to learn about propagation is certainly getting on the air. Back to you, Paul.
So I would recommend the 3905 Century Club net. It's a fantastic net. They have it on 160 meters during the winter, 80 meters during the winter, and 40 meters. And it's a very well-run net. It's a worked all states net. It's called the 3905 Century Club. The interesting thing is that a lot of eastern states have a difficult time working Colorado. And so on nights where propagation is really good, you can check in the net, and if there's 30 people that are on the net, maybe 40 some nights, and you're sitting at your station here in Colorado, when they go through the list, a lot of those stations will call you. They will call the Colorado station, and especially if you're the only Colorado station on the net that night. And I've literally gotten on there. They have a early and a late 80 meter net. I've literally checked into both nets and had almost continuous calls for 3 to 4 hours some nights. Now, for me, I've already worked all those states on 80, but it does give you a lot of practice at pulling out very, very weak signals. That is a huge thing about these worked all states nets, because you're trying to give each station a signal report, and you're working down in the noise. Sometimes it's just unbelievable using your digital signal processing and other tools and techniques, tools on your radio and techniques that you've learned over the years. And you work some of these people that it's amazing that you're actually able to get a signal report and give them a signal report. And so again, if you need those states for 80 meters, log them. If you've already worked all states on 80, well, get on there just to hone your skills and help other people out. And again, that's the 3905 Century Club. Check it out. I think you'll find it very, very exciting especially the 80 meter net is absolutely fantastic. Okay, we're going to go through this fairly quickly on antennas. Everyone asks about antennas. We get a lot of questions on the Elmer committee about what kind of antenna should I put up. And, we're always going to say, get something up. I mean, whatever type of antenna you can get up, whether you live in an apartment and you put up a mag loop or whatever the case is. But we're going to talk just briefly here about different types of antennas. Now, everyone knows I run the 4BTV Hustler Vertical, and I'm very happy with that antenna. It's a trap vertical, but it's very inexpensive and works well. There's a lot of different brands of vertical antennas out there, but let's go through the vertical antenna for just a minute. Verticals are very good for restricted spaces. Even if you are not allowed to have an antenna at your HOA, you can put up a vertical on a fold-over base plate, put it up at night, operate all night if you want to, and then put it back down when you're done, and no one will ever see it. Verticals are really better for 10 through 40 meters. They're more difficult to source and to actually install for lower bands, but for the bands 10 through 40, they work very well. If you do use a vertical for 80 meters, for instance, they're going to be very, very narrow, and if it's a multi-band vertical, just expect it to be so narrow that you may want to set it to one frequency, like the 3905 Century Club, and leave it there. You're not going to get much additional use out of that antenna, at least from having a decent SWR. You should mount these on the ground. Really, they work best as ground-mounted antennas, but you'll see some advertised as capable of being mounted on roofs and other structures as well. They do work, but I think they work best if they're ground mounted. You must have a good radial field. The length of the radials is not as important as having as many radials as you can get down. And if you mount the antenna up against a fence and the radials to the east are 3 feet long, the radials to the west are 30 feet long, and north and south are varying lengths, that's fine. It doesn't matter really how long the radials are, but you need to get as many down as you can for the antenna to work correctly. These vertical antennas for HF are fairly low cost. Most of them, if you get into some of the, there are some very expensive multi-band verticals, and but for the most part, you can buy these antennas like the 4BTV, 5BTV, and 6BTV are very inexpensive. Actually, I think the 4BTV right now is under $200, probably more by the time you buy some accessories that go with it. Some verticals require tuners, but the one I use does not. So if you're running an amp and you want to run 1,000 watts, or you want to run 1,200 watts or 800 watts or whatever, and you don't want to run a tuner, then some of these verticals are excellent because they have high power handling capability. But if you tune them for the band that you want to work on or the segment of the band that you'll operate on, you don't need a tuner. And that just takes one big piece of equipment out of the puzzle when you're trying to operate high power. And you're going to find that most verticals will hear more man-made noise than horizontal antennas, but it really varies. It varies with the type of installation, the location, whether you're in the middle of Denver or whether you're out in Cripple Creek. It varies a lot with location, but that is a fair statement that you typically do hear more man-made noise than you would with the horizontal antenna. But in many, many HOA antenna restricted areas, I strongly recommend you look at a vertical antenna, and the Elmer Committee will be happy to help you install one. And if you have any questions, you can also talk to Ralph. Ralph is one of our members that operates a 6BTV vertical, and he operates exactly the way I described it. He lays it down during the day and pulls it up at night. Nobody knows it's there. Absolutely great way to operate in HOA antenna restricted locations. All right, Dan, what do you think about wire dipole antennas?
Paul, I'm a fan. I'm a fan of wire dipoles for numerous reasons. One, it's something you can build yourself. I mean, that is, how great is that? We're amateur radio operators. Yeah, you can go to the store, you can buy the antennas, you can buy the verticals, but there's something special about being able to build these antennas yourself. And in particular, the single band versions of a wire dipole are very, very efficient. You're going to be cutting those to length, and based upon those lengths are going to obviously indicate what bands versions you're going to be able to use. So again, very, very efficient antennas that can be done. If you're cutting those to length, like Paul had mentioned, as far as the tuners are concerned, no tuner needed. If you cut it appropriately and cut it to length on the single band, you can operate that band very, very efficiently. So we were talking about building the antenna yourself, and what you're going to want to incorporate with that is a balun. And a balun means balanced to unbalanced, and you're using that with a wire. And typically with wire dipoles, you're going to use some more and need some more space, like we were talking about on 160 meters, 80 meters, and even 40 meters. You're going to need some space because that's going to require some pretty good footage of wire. 20 meters, now you're starting to get into 16 feet on each side, and even 40 meters, now you're up to 32 feet on each side. Now, wire dipoles aren't necessarily very good for multiband operation, but they can be used on multiband with an appropriate antenna tuner. So that antenna tuner is going to help everything cooperate and keep the SWR readings pretty darn low. One of the very big benefits that I had mentioned is that no antenna tuner is required if you're operating close to a designated frequency. So those single band versions of the antenna, based upon the wire length that you're cutting that antenna for, big benefit, you don't need to buy an external antenna. That is a great way. There's many people that I know who operate with wire dipole antennas, and they have them cut for specific bands, and they use an antenna switch. They actually have some property that they're able to get away with that, and boy, what a great job that they do performance-wise. Many members of our club are fortunate enough to have some acreage, so if they're not putting towers up, many are using the wire dipoles. Now, one of the things that you're going to want to ensure, particularly with a wire antenna, we were talking about the length of wire. That is obviously important, but at the same time, too, the optimizing how high you get that off the ground is going to be very, very important as well. The higher, the better. So you're going to want to get that balun up as high as possible off the ground. That is really going to enhance the performance as far as your propagation and your signal getting out, and also on the receive side as well. Back to you, Paul.
So people get tired of me saying this, but if you only are gonna put up one antenna, put up a single band dipole. It's the most efficient. You don't need a tuner. Multi-band antennas are fine, but they're not going to work nearly as well. So this is always your first choice for any antenna installation, in my opinion. Let's talk about a few mistakes that people who are new to HF make, and certainly this is an opinion. This slide was put together by me, so if you you disagree with something in here, you can always pound me on this. But anyway, I would steer away from any of the G5 RV antennas, either the regular G5 RV or especially the G5 RV Junior version. And the reason that's the case is that they're usually installed wrong. So you go to HRO. You're a new HF operator. You're looking for an antenna. HRO will sell you a G5 RV always, and that's fine. But look at the instructions. Follow the information that Dan mentioned. The antenna has to be at a certain height to operate efficiently. G5 RVs need to be at a certain height, And most people install them along the side of their house or in very compromised situations, and then they don't understand why they don't work well and why they have high noise levels. So the G5RV, in my opinion, is a bad choice for most new HF operators. Also, any type of multi-band vertical or any type of a multi-band antenna that says it'll operate all the ham bands with no tuning. If you see that, it's not true, okay? Any of these miracle antennas that are advertised will not work as advertised. I guarantee you, especially the ones that say, you know, they'll operate on all the ham bands from 10 meters to 160, no tuner required. There is no such thing. No such thing. So avoid those types of antennas. Multi-band antennas in general are really not the best solution if you're starting out as a newer operator in the HF band, simply because, again, you know, if you have a good tuner, and that's not necessarily the tuner in your radio, which is designed for antennas that have SWRs of 3 to 1 or less, right? That's all they're going to tune. And a lot of these multi-band antennas try to do magic with wires at various lengths and this and that and the other. And while some of them do work, again, you have to be very careful about the installation requirements of these antennas, because very few people ever get them to work like the factory does, simply because the factory is installing them out in open space at the right height, and they can make it work and they can advertise it, but that way, but it typically doesn't work at your QTH. Also, any antenna, especially if it's a vertical, that says no ground radials required. Okay, Comet makes one. It's a HF vertical antenna, no radials required. So no radial vertical antenna. Doesn't work. Don't spend your money on it. You'll find that if you take that same antenna and put some radials down, it works great. Otherwise, you'll be disappointed and you'll wonder why you upgraded and why you're even trying to operate on the HF bands. Also, any amount of wire you put up is better than not having an antenna. I've always said that. I'll always say that. If you only have room to put up a 25-foot antenna, put up 25 feet of wire, but come up with creative ways to put up as much wire as you can. And it doesn't always have to be in a straight line. Okay, it can be in an L, it can be in a square, it can be in a rectangle configuration. It can go low, it can go high, it can go in between. The more wire you get up, if you're talking about wire antennas anyway, the better. Just keep that in mind. And if you need some help with that, the Elmer committee will be happy to come out and give you some advice on any antenna installation. But we'll always tell you that put up as much wire as you can. And with some of these antennas that are listed here, you're going to have an antenna tuner. And in some cases, it's going to have to be an antenna tuner that is different than the one you have in your radio. Because again, that tuner will only tune antennas that are about 3 to 1 and lower. If it's 10 to 1 or 8 to 1, your internal tuner in your radio is not going to work. So these are just some general things that I would tell you to look for. Maybe don't go down these particular paths, and if you can, put up a single band dipole. It'll work better than anything else you can buy, or a single band vertical. And then you can start getting into some of the other multi-band antennas, and some of those will work, again, if they're installed correctly per the instructions. Okay, well, wow, that was it, Dan. That was the last slide, and that was exciting. I don't even know where I'm at right now. Back over to you, Dan, while I figure out where my screen is here.
Yeah, well, you'll want to turn off your presenting on your side. So if you want to hit the stop presenting, we'll be back in the room. Boy, Paul, just a a really good, solid run through of the basics of HF operating. It can be overwhelming. We went over a lot tonight, but the big thing with this is that just to make sure you take one or two things out of this. And I think that if you can take one or two elements out of everything that we talked about and you're able to apply them, your experience will be a lot more enjoyable. Trying to remember it all is difficult to do, but here's the cool part. We have it on YouTube, so you can go back and check different things and go, wait a minute, what did he say here? Or what did Paul mention about 80 meters? Or what was Dan talking about the WARC bands again? Just pull one or two little segments out and go ahead and apply them. The biggest thing that I can suggest out of anything is get on the air. That is absolutely so important. If you get on the air, no matter what all the different propagation forecasts and readings are, that is the way to find out what's going on the HF bands. Yes, all the other readings and tools that are online are just that. They're resources, but boy, getting on it, finding out firsthand is the way to do it. That would be my biggest suggestion.
Excellent points, Dan. And before I irritate too many people with my G5RV comments, remember at Field Day the last couple of years we ran G5RVs. So, but we did have them at the right height, and they work exceptionally well. So anyway, I knew I was going to get a few comments on that comment. Hey, Wayne, do you have any questions out there that have popped up?
We did have a couple questions. Let me take a look here. On the YouTube live side, K0MSO asked, is the propagation better during sunspot activity?
Typically, yes. Yes.
As long as there's not a solar storm.
Correct.
And we got one coming this weekend. Great. So, and is the ionosphere usually consistent globally, or does it vary by location?
That's a great question, and that's an excellent question, by the way. I'm going to throw that over to Tom to answer that.
It varies all over the place. And if you want, in fact, I'll throw it in chat. You can. There's something called ionosons, which are scattered all over the world. They give you a tremendous amount of information. You have to do a little digging. But you can see what the propagation is anywhere in the world, straight up, because that's what they transmit. One of the sites happens to be Boulder. So you can see what the muff is in Boulder, which is pretty darn close to us. No, it varies all over the place. It varies with the time of day. So if you stop and think about it, right now we're at night. Other side of the world's in daylight. Daylight's getting the D layer built up and losing their LUF, the lowest usable frequency. And I'll throw the link to where to find that in the chat.
And what was that word again? What was that word again? I was looking for that word earlier, and obviously I botched it. But what was the word for the instrument? What was it again? Say again. Ionosond. Thank you. Yeah, I butchered that earlier. I think I said something pretty stupid. But the other entity that is really, really big on propagation forecasting is the Australian government.
And then looking back, we touched on 60 meters. Scott K0WAV mentioned that it's used a lot by Aries, Races, and Mars. And also there's 3,077 counties in the United States. And yeah, there's some comments in here, Paul, about your magic antennas. But yeah, that's all the questions. The only thing that I wanted to add is get on the air. If you don't have a radio, use an SDR. There's web SDRs all over the world. Listen to HF. If you don't have a radio, just get on one of the SDRs, listen. I transmit on QRP all the time, and I will get on an SDR to make sure that I can hear myself in San Francisco, in Utah, just to see how far my signal is getting out.
I've worked several stations recently that their receiver is a remote SDR receiver, so they're hearing me on the SDR. They're transmitting from their QTH, and which is in another state maybe, and it works very, very well.
Paul, I think Brad BDT has his hand up. Brad, we'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, I was just going to add, if you're a newly licensed general and you don't have an HF transceiver, you can borrow one from the PRA. We have a couple of radios available to be checked out. The ICOM IC7300, which is a fantastic radio, very sophisticated display with a touchscreen, or the Yaesu FT991A, which is a complete shack in a box, covers all the bands and all the modes. Both of those radios are available to be checked out.
We have a third radio now.
705.
Oh, yes, the 705 as well.
Thanks, Brad.
Yeah, I don't see any other questions. Anybody else have anything to add?
Paul did say he was a little hesitant. 60 meters is limited as far as power to 100 watts ERP. In other words, you have to take into account antenna gain and other things. So it's a little trickier.
So I'll ask this question, and I know the answer, but I'll see who else knows the answer. If your radio is a recent model radio from Yaesu, ICOM, Flex, or whoever, where do you usually find the 60-meter channels already programmed in the radio? Does anybody know where you find that in the radio? Where would that be, Scott?
It's in the memories.
Correct.
It's already programmed in the memory. You can't erase them either. You can't modify them. You can't erase them. They're just there.
That's right. So if you're used to using your touch screen and going to 20 meters, 40 meters, 30 meters, whatever, there may not be a button for 60 meters. But if you go to your memory channel selection and scroll through the memory channels, they'll already be programmed in there for you. And again, it is channelized.
One more thing, too, on some of the newer memories that come out on the radios, there's actually, there's only 5 channels, but there's 10 memories taken because they've actually pre-programmed phone and data so that because you tune to a different spot of the channel.
Thank you.
And by the way, this is stolen plans of Randy's tower in the background here. So this is his dream tower.
I don't think he poured a big enough base. Well, I don't know. It was big.
I thought that was Justin's hex beam.
It's too upright.
Paul, Michael in the chat room had a question. When monitoring HF, what's a good frequency to monitor? And then there's a supplemental question there, maybe an emergency frequency to monitor. You have any insights on that?
Well, I think during the day, monitoring 20 meters is always going to be your best bet. And at night, you can't go wrong with 40 meters. You'll always hear conversations on 20 during the day and 40 at night.
I would concur. I think during the day on 20 meters, right around 14.300, you typically get a maritime mobile net that comes on. I think at least a couple times during the day. I think they're on in the morning and they're also on in the afternoon. That's a good one to listen to as well. A couple other people have commented. Doug, KE0DC, says 14.315 has weather nets. Scott, AK6Q, on the Summits on the Air activities, 14.285. Another great one to listen to on 20 meters.
And on 40 at night, 7.185. There's always a net there. 7.178, I believe. There's usually a net on there. And then there's people operating QRP on 40 up around 7.285, and also some AM people up there.
But great question, Michael. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Okay, well, it is 9 p.m. on the dot. And Dan, I think you had the schedule perfect, right? 7 to 9. So we had a long presentation, but covered a lot of ground. You can go back and view that on our YouTube live page, and we also have it in a PowerPoint or Keynote format if anyone would like to have it for use somewhere else if they'd like to present it somewhere else. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. We had a great turnout. And good to see everybody. I really hope to see everybody in person here, maybe in May, but certainly in June. I certainly think we'll be there in June. I hope we'll be there in June. So anyway, I'll say 73 from the AC5S Shack, and good DXing.
Get on the air. 73, everyone.
73, everyone.
Thanks, Paul.
We are off the air.